Did you know George Washington was a Freemason? No, it's true. I'm a little surprised so many of you didn't know that. Anyway, even if you didn't know that, you probably know he was the first president of the United States, and history tells us he ran virtually unopposed in the election of 1788 to 1789. Well, the key word is, I guess, virtually. You see, the Constitution stipulated the presidency would go to the person getting the most electoral votes, and the vice presidency would go to the runner-up. So the question is, if Washington was the unanimous winner of the election, how could there be a runner-up? And if there was a runner-up, just how did Washington get all the votes? And doesn't that mean he had an opponent in that election? And if your head isn't spinning by now, get this. Technically, you could say George Washington had 11 opponents in that race. 11. See, the key to this puzzle is the fact that each of the 69 electors back then got 2 votes. So the first 69 votes went to Washington, and he won a unanimous victory. Then the second set of 69 votes went to a variety of men, with the one garnering the most votes becoming vice president. So who were these guys? You can probably guess one of them was John Adams, who received 34 of the remaining 69 votes and became our first vice president, going on to become the second president. Robert Harrison, no relation that we know of, Washington's personal military secretary, received 6 votes. Also receiving 6 votes was John Rutledge, who became the second Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. John Milton, first Secretary of State of Georgia, received 2 votes. James Armstrong, a Georgia State Representative, and Edward Telfair, Governor of Georgia, both got a single vote. Georgia was well represented. So, Adams, Harrison, Rutledge, Milton, Armstrong, and Telfair account for 6 of the men receiving electoral votes. The remaining 6, including Washington, half the field, were Freemasons. John Jay, first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, received 9 votes and came in a distant second to Adams for the vice presidency. His Masonic status is, in fact, somewhat vague, but it is likely he was a member. John Hancock, first signer of the Declaration of Independence and first governor of Massachusetts, received 4 votes. George Clinton, governor of New York and later vice president, got 3 votes. Samuel Huntington, second Grand Master of Ohio and also a governor of Ohio, received 2 votes. Finally, Benjamin Lincoln, ex officio Secretary of War during the American Revolution, got a single vote. There was not much of a campaign in that election. It was a foregone conclusion George Washington would win. It's likely each of the 11 also-rans we've talked about had his sights on the vice presidency. Also, although there were no political parties per se, most of the candidates were like-minded Federalists, favoring a strong federal government. only Clinton and Telfair were anti-federalists who not only opposed a strong federal government, but also opposed ratification of the Constitution. In addition to that, back then it was considered rather undignified for a gentleman to campaign for an office. Some might say that's the opposite of our situation today, where being undignified seems to be a requirement for public office. One wonders if the aversion to campaigning has something to do with the fact electioneering is frowned upon, if not outright banned, in many Masonic elections. Our nation's first election, with a president elected unanimously and votes left over for 11 runners-up. Interestingly, in the inconceivable scenario they would have been elected president, or maybe a bit more likely vice president, Harrison, Rutledge, Armstrong, and Brother John Hancock would have died in office. For the Whence Came You podcast, this is Steve Harrison with the Masonic Minute.